You think this moment is real. The weight of your body, the sound of your breath, the way your thoughts narrate your life as if you're the lead character on a stage no one else sees. But what if this feeling of realness is just the illusion that's been practiced the longest? What if reality isn't what's true, but simply what your mind has rehearsed so many times it forgot it was pretending? Tonight, we'll drift through a theater of thoughts, where every instinct is a script, every memory a prop, and every emotion a spotlight. Welcome to the show. Let's begin. You wake up every day and step onto a stage you didn't design. The floor creaks beneath familiar routines. Your hands know where the light switch is before your eyes fully open. The mirror doesn't surprise you. Your face waits in the exact shape you left it yesterday. It all feels real, stable, yours, but have you ever wondered how much of that certainty is just choreography? A performance polished through decades of repetition. Every action feels natural, not because it's true, but because it's been rehearsed 1,000 times. Life, in this light, isn't raw experience. It's a production. One with invisible scripts, cast members, and a director you never meet. You don't consciously rehearse waking up, brushing your teeth, walking to the fridge. These acts were drilled into your nervous system through years of repetition, until they became invisible, and like any good actor, you stopped noticing the script. That's what makes it believable. Cognitive science calls this procedural memory. It's the reason your body remembers how to walk, type, or drive long after your mind forgets learning them. But beyond muscle memory, something deeper is happening. Your mind rehearses ideas, patterns of thought, and emotional responses the same way it rehearses walking. You begin to mistake familiarity for truth. Rehearsed belief becomes reality. Your sense of identity, your entire self, is part of this rehearsal. The same stories about who you are play in the background. I'm shy around strangers. I'm not good at math. I always mess things up. These lines have been recited silently for so long they no longer sound like thoughts. They feel like facts. But what if they're just performances running on cue? You were taught, perhaps unknowingly, to act this way. Maybe you once hesitated before speaking in class. Someone laughed. It echoed. Your brain filed that script away, rehearsed it, and now, when the moment comes to speak, your body flinches before your mind can argue. Not because of truth, but because of a past scene that never stopped replaying. Even your environment plays its role. The walls, the smells, the way sunlight cuts through your window in the morning. Each of these is a stage cue. The brain doesn't perceive reality directly. It predicts what should be there based on past rehearsals, then fills in the blanks. This is predictive coding, a theory in neuroscience, suggesting that what you experience is not raw sensory input, but your brain's best guess of what's probably happening based on previous performances. So you're not experiencing the world as it is. You're experiencing the most statistically rehearsed version of it. A curated, edited highlight reel that feels real only because the mind has played it on loop for years. And here's the unsettling part. The more you repeat something, whether it's a thought, behavior, or belief, the more real it feels. This is called the illusion of truth effect. You've seen it in how people start to believe a lie simply because it's been repeated enough. But what if your entire self is built from this very effect? The more your mind rehearses who you are, the more unshakable that self becomes, even if it's wrong. The you feel is not a fixed entity, but a constellation of rehearsed roles. In one situation you play the friend, in another the worker, the child, the rebel, the caretaker, the victim, the hero. Each role comes with its own costume, voice and emotional tone, and you shift between them so seamlessly, you forget it's all performance. You call it personality. But in truth, it's closer to a stage rotation of identity masks, each practiced to the point of invisibility. Why does this matter? Because once you realize life is a stage, and that what feels real is simply what's been rehearsed, you gain the power to change the script, to question, is this emotion true, or just well rehearsed? Is this fear mine, or was it given to me? Am I really this person, or am I just good at playing them? You are not your thoughts. You are the actor who's memorized their lines. And if you've memorized them, you can rewrite them. But here's the paradox. Even that realization that you are performing can become another performance, another layer of illusion. The ego loves wearing the mask of the one who sees through the masks. It plays the role of the awakened, of the one who knows. It says, I'm not like the others, I see the truth. And suddenly, you're back on stage, back under the lights, rehearsing the illusion of enlightenment. So how do you step off the stage? Maybe you don't. Maybe the goal is not to escape the performance, but to notice it. To sit in the audience and watch yourself with gentle curiosity. To realize you've been the actor, the writer, the director, and the stagehand all along. And when the curtains close, maybe that's the most honest moment of all. You blink. The world returns. The performance continues. But now, you're not aware of most of what your mind is doing. Not really. Right now, as you listen, there are phrases forming in your head, reactions rising, images flashing by, and none of them asked for permission. They just happen. You don't author every thought. You don't even catch most of them. They run beneath awareness, like a script already in progress, guiding the next scene before you've even realized the lights have come on. And still, you feel in control. This is the illusion of authorship. A well-rehearsed mental performance that convinces you each thought is your own. But scientists like Daniel Wegner proposed something strange, that the feeling of willing an action might actually come after the action has already begun. Like clapping at the end of a play, your awareness arrives just in time to take credit for something it didn't start. Think of how many things your body already knows how to do without your conscious involvement. Breathing, swallowing, the subtle adjustments your eyes make every second. These are the background crew. They move in silence, not waiting for a conscious command. And now consider how much of your behavior might also be part of that quiet cast, trained into the subconscious through rehearsal. Habits, reflexes, fears, defenses, beliefs, each one repeating a line, not because it's true, but because it was once useful. You might be afraid of public speaking, not because something terrible happened, but because your body rehearsed fear enough times to automate it. You might struggle to trust people, not because you've calculated betrayal, but because your brain, long ago, ran a script that said, "This is safer," and it stuck. Psychology has a name for these deeply embedded mental instructions: schemas. They are frameworks the mind uses to interpret the world, and once they're in place, they filter everything you see. If your schema says the world is dangerous, even kindness feels suspicious. If your schema says you're unworthy, compliments become threats. These frameworks run beneath awareness, but they color everything. They are the lighting and the music behind the scene, and without them, the play would feel different, maybe even unrecognizable. But schemas don't announce themselves. They whisper, and they whisper in repetition. Repetition is how illusion gains credibility. The more a message is repeated, whether by your own thoughts or by the voices of others, the more legitimate it feels. Even false memories can be manufactured through rehearsal. In the lab, researchers like Elizabeth Loftus have shown how easily people can be led to believe they experienced things that never happened. Plant the seed, repeat the suggestion, and the mind starts filling in the details. Now imagine how many of your own memories, those moments you swear are real, might just be the result of internal repetition, told to yourself so many times they hardened into facts. The awkward interaction you replay every week, the story of how someone hurt you, the belief that you always fail, each one sharpened by rehearsal, each one echoing beneath awareness like a well-rehearsed monologue. The irony? You feel these things most intensely when you're not thinking about them. That's the power of unconscious scripts. They don't wait for you to engage. They run on autopilot, and they shape your world quietly. Take this moment, for example. You're listening. But beneath that listening, you're predicting what I'll say next. Your brain is always forecasting, filling in gaps, guessing where the narrative is headed. This is called predictive processing. It means your experience of now is less about what's happening, and more about what your brain expects to happen, based on everything it's rehearsed before. So what feels real isn't real because it's true. It's real because your brain rehearsed it first. And here's the trap. You begin to trust that feeling of reality. You lean on it like a cane, believing that if something feels solid, it must be certain. But that sensation that yes, this is true feeling is just another script. One designed to stabilize your mental play, to keep the illusion coherent, to keep you from noticing the backstage. But sometimes, the curtain slips. Sometimes, in a moment of silence or déjà vu or confusion, you catch a flicker of the rehearsal. You notice your reaction happening before your thought. You watch yourself laugh at a joke you didn't find funny. You say "I'm fine" even when you're not, and feel a strange disconnect as if someone else said it for you. Those moments are not malfunctions. They are glimpses, tiny cracks in the illusion, reminding you that so much of who you think you are is simply the most repeated version. And yet, there's a paradox here too, because trying to notice the subconscious scripts can itself become a script. You start to play the role of the observer. You rehearse mindfulness. You narrate your detachment. "Ah, look at me noticing my thoughts," you say, while subtly slipping into another role. But awareness, if practiced deeply, eventually leads not to control, but to humility. You begin to realize how little you truly command, how thoughts rise on their own, how desires arrive uninvited, how opinions form before you can question them. And in that quiet acknowledgement, there's a strange kind of peace, a surrender to the rehearsal. You are not broken for having scripts. You are not flawed for playing roles. You are a stage, a cast, a play in progress. And beneath awareness, the story continues. The lights dim, the next line waits, and the illusion begins again. There's a moment that passes before every moment. You don't notice it. You're not supposed to. It's the moment your brain anticipates what's coming next, silently rehearsing what the world should feel like. So when the real thing arrives, it fits neatly into your expectations. A sound, a smell, a glance. You think you're experiencing it raw, but you're not. You're experiencing your preparation for it. Every second of your life is filtered through what neuroscientists call anticipatory processing, a rehearsal before reality. Your brain doesn't wait for information, it predicts, it plays out possible futures, and when the actual input arrives, it adjusts, corrects, blends. What you call now is already layered with what your mind rehearsed 5 milliseconds ago. You don't live in the present. You do. You live in the rehearsed version of the present. Even your emotions come rehearsed. The body learns to flinch before it's hurt, to grieve before it loses, to fall in love before it meets. There's no clean slate in the theatre of consciousness. Everything that enters is greeted by expectations, and expectations are just rehearsals on repeat. You don't walk into a room and discover it fresh. Your brain runs the blueprint first. It maps the door, the shadows, the possible faces you might see. By the time your eyes scan the scene, your perception has already been pre-edited. The illusion feels real, because it was staged before you arrived. Now think about how often your thoughts rehearse themselves. Not just in words, but in tone, in pacing, in patterns. The way you argue with yourself, the way you justify, the way you retreat. These aren't spontaneous reactions. They're performances written by a part of you you've forgotten how to name. And the more a moment is rehearsed, the more convincing it becomes, even if it never actually happened. Have you ever imagined a confrontation so vividly it left you emotionally drained, even though nothing occurred? Your brain rehearsed it. The stress, the anger, the exact words exchanged. And because your body doesn't distinguish between real and imagined rehearsal, it responded accordingly. Heart rate rising, muscles tightening, breath shortening, a full performance rehearsed in the absence of an audience. Now consider how much of your suffering is not from what happened, but from what was rehearsed to happen. You live inside a loop of imagined scenes, a reality practiced so thoroughly it bleeds into truth. That's the power of rehearsal. It doesn't just prepare you, it replaces reality. It overwrites the raw with the probable. And soon, you don't just expect the pattern, you believe it. Even memory plays along. You think remembering is a replay, but it's not. It's a reconstruction. Each time you remember an event, your brain rebuilds it from fragments. Details stitched together by what it expects to be true. And with every reconstruction, the memory changes. It becomes more polished, more rehearsed, until the version you remember most vividly is no longer the real one. It's the best practiced one. It feels real, so it must be real, right? But reality isn't built from raw events. It's built from rehearsals of how those events should feel. Why does this matter? Because you're not just rehearsing what happened. You're rehearsing what's allowed to happen. You train your nervous system to expect certain outcomes: failure, rejection, abandonment, and that training limits what you can see. It turns life into a stage that keeps performing the same act, even as the sets change. You meet new people, but your lines are old. You chase new dreams, but the backstage remains the same. It's not the world that's stuck. It's the rehearsal script you're bringing to it. And that script was often written by fear. Fear rehearses louder than joy, and it demands more attention. It spins more variations. It tries harder to protect you from scenes that haven't even begun. But what if the rehearsal is the danger? What if over-preparing for pain becomes the very reason you feel it so often? The mind rehearses to survive. But the cost of survival is sometimes aliveness. You see, spontaneity is reality's rawest form. It's unrehearsed, unpredictable, vulnerable. But somewhere along the way, spontaneity began to feel unsafe. So we replaced it with the comfort of scripts. The problem is, those scripts never stop. They play when you're alone. They echo in silence. They shape your future before it arrives. Even now, your mind is rehearsing what this script means. You're predicting where it's headed. You're guessing how it will make you feel. But what if you didn't? What if, just for a breath, you let this moment be unrehearsed? No expectations. No lines. No role to play. Just the present, as it is, before the mind rewrites it. It's disorienting. But it's real. And maybe, just maybe, that's where reality begins. And not in the practiced, not in the perfect, but in the space where nothing is certain, where the moment hasn't yet been told what to be, and where you haven't yet decided who you are. Familiarity is the softest trap of all. So it doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't raise alarms. It just waits calmly, quietly, until you mistake it for truth. You wake up in the same bed, brush your teeth with the same hand, sip your coffee from the same side of the mug, and something inside you sighs in relief. Yes, it whispers. This feels right. But does it feel right because it is right? Or simply because it's what your body and mind have memorized? We're trained to believe that familiarity equals safety, that when something feels known, it must also be good, or real, or correct. But reality doesn't arrive with emotional labels. It doesn't wear a tag that says this is safe or this is dangerous. Your mind writes those labels, and it writes them using only one ink, what it's seen before. This is the mere exposure effect, a psychological bias that makes you favor things simply because you've been exposed to them more often. Songs, faces, beliefs, stories, even pain. The more often your mind sees something, the more it accepts it. Repetition creates comfort, and comfort masquerades as truth. Think about how many ideas you believe, not because you've questioned them, but because you've seen them enough. Repeated in childhood, reinforced by family, echoed by media. They feel true because they're familiar. But familiarity is not a mirror. It's a mirage, a shimmering certainty that disappears when you walk toward it. And still, we cling to it. Because the unfamiliar feels wrong. Even if it's better. Even if it's freer. You might stay in a relationship that doesn't nourish you, just because its patterns are known. You might repeat the same job, the same thoughts, the same weekend rituals, not because they spark anything alive, but because they don't require rewriting the script. You know your lines, and there's a comfort in knowing them. But that comfort costs you something. It costs you spontaneity. It costs you curiosity. It costs you the rawness of reality before it gets filtered through rehearsal. Even your sense of who I am is built from this. When someone asks who you are, you rarely answer with a question. You answer with the lines you've learnt to recite. I'm not good at socializing. I hate confrontation. I love this city. But are those true, or just familiar? You may have built your identity around outdated scripts, inherited reactions, hand-me-down beliefs that once served you but no longer do. And still they remain, because they're easy to find, easy to wear, familiar. But just like a favorite sweater stretched out over time, they no longer fit the body you've become. And yet, you wear them. Because change feels like forgetting your lines, like stepping on stage with no script. And that's terrifying. The mind resists change because change requires unlearning, and unlearning requires sitting with the discomfort of unfamiliarity, with moments that don't make immediate sense, with silence that doesn't rush to be filled, with thoughts that arrive uninvited, and truths that don't comfort you. So instead we retreat to the known, the mirage of familiarity. We drink from the same well, even if it runs dry. But here's the deeper twist. Familiarity doesn't just make things feel real, it makes them feel more real than the truth. You've seen it in how people cling to harmful beliefs even when presented with facts. You've felt it when someone offered you love and you pulled away, because pain was the emotion you recognized. That pain, though unbearable, felt more real than kindness, more familiar, more believable. This is the danger of the rehearsed illusion. It doesn't just blur the line between real and fake, it replaces the real with the familiar. And the longer you stay in that loop, the more invisible it becomes. You stop asking, "Do I want this life?" You start asking, "Is this what I've always done?" And when the answer is yes, you stop there, because always feels safe. But always isn't truth. It's just an echo that got louder over time. So how do you tell the difference? You pay attention to the friction, the moments that feel strange, the thoughts that don't align with your usual rhythm, the questions that make you uncomfortable, not because they're wrong, but because they're unfamiliar. Those are cracks in the mirage, little slits where unrehearsed light gets in, and in those slits you glimpse something raw, something that doesn't care whether you've seen it before, something that might be more real than the reality you've memorized. But to see it, you have to let go of the urge to feel certain. You have to sit in a room with new thoughts and not rush to file them away. You have to let yourself forget your lines and still show up. And because life isn't meant to be a perfect performance. It was never meant to be memorized. It was meant to be lived. Messy, spontaneous, unfamiliar. And maybe the moments that don't feel real are the ones that actually are. They're just waiting for you to notice. There's a moment, brief, fleeting, when you become aware of yourself. Not just aware in the mechanical sense of thought, but aware that you are the one thinking, that you are observing from behind the eyes, not just through them. But what if even that awareness is just another cue? A spotlight turned on at the right time, making you believe you're in control when in fact you're still on script. You feel conscious, present, watching. But what if consciousness only appears when the performance needs it? Like a stage actor waiting in the wings, stepping forward only when the scene requires a certain line, then vanishing when the applause fades. It's a theory that's quietly haunted neuroscience for years. Is consciousness the main event? Or just the narrator arriving late to the story? Some thinkers argue consciousness is post-dictive, that it doesn't guide reality, but comes in after the fact to explain what already happened. You touch a hot stove, you recoil, then your awareness arrives and says, "I pulled away because it burned me," but the pulling back was already done. The cue had been triggered. You simply stepped in afterward, retrofitting a story around the sensation. Even your most real thoughts, the ones you feel you crafted yourself, might just be responses, conditioned, timed, activated, like a cue in a well-rehearsed performance. So the question becomes, if your consciousness appears on cue, who's writing the script? You weren't consulted about your deepest fears. You didn't choose what kind of childhood shaped you. You didn't decide what would make your heart race or your throat tighten. And yet, here you are, acting, feeling, reacting, conscious, and still somehow not fully in control. It's unsettling to consider that your sense of I am might just be a character that enters on schedule, delivers a few lines of commentary, then disappears while the play goes on without them. But the illusion is seamless. You feel as if you're always present, always steering, always the one behind the wheel, until something unexpected happens. You blurt out a phrase and wonder, why did I say that? You reach for your phone before your brain even forms the thought. You feel a rush of emotion that has no clear source. And suddenly, you're reminded. Your consciousness isn't the writer. It's the actor who believes they wrote the script because they rehearsed it so well. And still, you crave the feeling of authorship. The comfort of believing that you decide, that you respond, that you choose. And so the mind decorates each moment of awareness with meaning. It builds a narrative around why you said what you said, why you feel how you feel, why you believe what you believe. But meaning is just another cue. It enters the scene, not because it was needed, but because it was expected. Like a familiar sound effect in a film that tells you how to feel, your mind cues consciousness in the same way. It says, "Now is when I become aware," and your awareness obeys, not because it truly awakened, but because it followed its mark. You are not always awake, even when your eyes are open. You are not always present, even when you feel sharp and alert. Consciousness, it seems, is a rehearsed response, one that flickers on only when the pattern calls for it. So what happens in the gaps? Where do you go when you're not here? The honest answer? You never left. You were still acting, still reacting, still moving in the world, but without the inner narrator, without the illusion of presence. And perhaps that's the most convincing part of the show, the belief that you are always here, always watching, always awake. But even the audience blinks, even the spotlight dims. Even the actor forgets their lines and keeps talking anyway. So where does this leave you? Is consciousness fake? Is the self just a puppet? No. It's more subtle than that. Your consciousness is real. But it's not what you think it is. It's not the center of control. It's the point of reflection. It doesn't decide what happens. It notices what already did. It frames the story. But it adds texture, brings weight to a moment, but it doesn't write the next scene. That happens somewhere deeper, quieter, older, maybe in the cells, maybe in the neurons that fire before words form, maybe in the breath that rises before permission is granted. And in that mystery there's something beautiful, because it means you are more than the thoughts you rehearse. You are more than the awareness that flickers on and off. You are the full performance, the cues, the pauses, the moments between lines, the silence that holds the scene together. And even when you forget your place in the play, the show continues. With or without you, memory doesn't record, it directs. It doesn't simply capture what happened, it decides what happened. And then, it builds the future from the wreckage of that decision. You like to think of memory as a kind of archive, a quiet library at the back of the mind, where the past is kept clean and untouched. But that's a myth. Memory is not a storage room. It's a stage manager. It cues lights, it blocks your movements. It chooses which scenes deserve emotion and which ones should be ignored. Every moment you experience now is filtered through something that already happened, or at least something you believe happened. And that belief is shaky. Neuroscience has shown that every time you recall a memory, you don't retrieve it, you rebuild it. You reconstruct it from fragments, layering new emotion, new meaning, new context. And in doing so, you subtly rewrite the past, not out of deception, but out of necessity. Because the brain is not loyal to truth. It's loyal to coherence. It wants the story to make sense, even if that story is an illusion rehearsed into reality. Imagine this. Two people witness the same event, a single conversation, a single night. 10 years later, they remember it differently. One says it was the moment they felt seen. The other says it was the beginning of their silence. Who's right? Both. Neither. Memory doesn't reflect reality. It reflects intention. It reflects what you needed it to mean at the time you recalled it. Which means memory is not just a witness to the play. It's the director. It shapes the scenes that follow. It tells you which emotions to bring into the next moment. It gives your character motivation. It decides who the villain was, and why the protagonist, you, never stood a chance. And the more you revisit a memory, the more staged it becomes. You start to remember the way you told it last, not the way it happened. The story you tell about your childhood, the first time you felt heartbreak, the moment everything changed. Each one rehearsed until the memory is less about truth and more about narrative control. You need a past to feel like a person, but that past is curated. Your brain deletes what doesn't serve the plot. It erases the days that didn't move the story forward. It exaggerates the scenes that fit your role. It quiets the characters who didn't fit the arc. And it replays the pain until it feels earned. Even your sense of self, this identity you protect so fiercely, is built from memories that your mind approved, not the whole truth, just the parts that rehearsed well, the ones that played to applause. So when something new happens, something that threatens that story, what does memory do? It edits. It reframes. It whispers, that doesn't fit the narrative. And you discard it. You reject people who challenge your role. You dismiss facts that contradict the script. You rewrite your reactions to stay in character. And the illusion holds. Not because it's real, but because it's been rehearsed longer than anything else. Memory becomes your editor-in-chief, your casting director, your producer, your script supervisor. And you never even see them. But there's a danger in letting memory run the show unchecked. Because when you believe your rehearsed story too deeply, you stop questioning it. You stop listening to the quiet voice that says, maybe it didn't happen like that. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was wrong. And in that silence, the illusion tightens. You become a character trapped in an old play, performing scenes written by a version of yourself that no longer exists. You fall in love the same way, even when it hurts. You sabotage opportunity with familiar fear. You chase validation with the same desperation you rehearsed at age 10. Not because it's what you want, but because it's what the director has always called for. So how do you break the script? You don't erase memory. You notice it. You treat it not as a truth teller, but as a storyteller. You sit in the audience and watch your memories perform. And you ask, why did I cast that person as the villain? Why do I replay that scene in the same tone? Who benefits from me remembering it this way? Because when you question memory, you begin to direct your own perception. You begin to write new scenes with different lighting. You let old characters retire. You change the soundtrack. You bring in improvisation. And slowly the illusion begins to bend. Reality softens. It becomes less about rehearsing what was, and more about living what is. You're still on stage. But now, the lines are yours. The mind speaks in words, but the body never needed them. It moves, recoils, reaches, flinches, softens, long before thought arrives. And yet, we credit the mind. We assume awareness is the star of the show, the one making the choices. But the body has been acting from the beginning, quietly, rehearsed to perfection. You feel afraid and think, I must be in danger. But what if the body felt fear first, years ago maybe, and now simply steps into its role on cue? The heart races not because you're in control, but because somewhere in the shadows of your nervous system, a line was triggered, a posture, a breath, a memory stored in the chest instead of the brain. The body is the actor that never forgot its part. It doesn't wait for a script, it is the script. This is what trauma researchers have whispered for years. The body keeps the score, because long after a moment has passed, the body continues to rehearse it. The body continues to rehearse it, not as a story, but as a sensation. Your jaw tenses in familiar conversations. Your shoulders lift slightly around authority. Your spine curls at the hint of rejection. You don't think these things, you become them. And still, you believe your decisions begin in the mind, but the mind often follows the body's lead, not the other way around. Like an actor showing up late to the scene, improvising a justification for why the door was already slammed, the breath already short, the tears already rising. We're trained to ignore the body's intelligence, to treat it as secondary, subservient. But your body is the stage manager, the lighting tech, the understudy who always remembers the lines. When your mind forgets, the body remembers. And not just through pain. Even joy, too, is rehearsed. That smile you offer to strangers. Was it spontaneous or practiced? The way your hand reaches for comfort. Was that instinct or choreography learned over years? Children mirror what they see. A tilted head, a raised eyebrow, a wince. And over time, the body learns which movements earn love and which ones earn silence. Those gestures stay. They repeat. They become muscle memory for approval. And slowly, without noticing, the body becomes a performer in a play it never auditioned for. It learns to avoid what once caused harm, even if that harm no longer exists. It learns to shrink when it should expand, to brace when it could rest, to flinch before the hand even moves. And the illusion builds, not because it's a lie, but because it's been performed for so long, it feels like the only truth left. Even illness can be a form of rehearsal. The body stuck in loops it can't exit. Inflammation as response. Fatigue as defense. Tension as memory. What feels real in the body isn't always real time. Sometimes it's echoes. Echoes of rooms that no longer exist. Words no longer spoken. Fears that belong to another version of you. And yet the body acts them out faithfully, because it doesn't know the scene has changed, unless you tell it, unless you notice. And this is the beginning of unrehearsal. To slow down enough to ask your own muscles, why are you clenching? Why are you holding your breath? Whose posture is this? And not to answer with words, but with presence, with attention, because the body doesn't need to be corrected. It needs to be listened to. In a world obsessed with thinking, listening to the body is a radical act. It breaks the illusion that the mind is the only source of wisdom. It reveals that your body has been delivering lines long before your thoughts caught up. So tonight, as you lie down, ask yourself, what part of me is performing without being seen? Is it the tension in your chest that appears when you hear your name? Is it the stillness in your hands when someone walks in the room? Is it the exhaustion that comes not from action, but from pretending you're okay? These are not accidents. They are cues. And every cue tells a story. Not the one you think. The one you've never spoken. The one the body has been acting out every single day. Beneath awareness, beneath applause, beneath explanation. And still, it waits for recognition. Because the body doesn't need you to fix it. It needs you to see it. To thank it for remembering when you forgot. To honor its loyalty, even when misguided. To give it permission to write a new role. Not one rehearsed in fear. Not one inherited from others. But one lived moment by moment, without the burden of performance. You are not broken. You are a performer who never left the stage. And now, you can take a bow. It starts small. A thought repeated. A gesture returned. A feeling that arrives at the same hour, in the same place, wearing the same face, and you begin to trust it. Not because it told the truth, but because it's always there. This is how patterns pretend. They mimic certainty. They drape themselves in the costume of reality and wait for you to bow. And when you do, they never leave. You see, the mind is not built to track raw chaos. It aches for rhythm. It finds patterns in clouds, in footsteps, in silence. Even randomness becomes a shape if you stare at it long enough. And once that shape is rehearsed, it feels real. The pattern becomes the plot. The mind says, this happened before, so it must happen again. It stops looking for truth and starts looking for repetition. You walk the same path home. You expect the same reactions from the same people. You predict your own failure before trying, because you've seen this movie before, haven't you? But have you? Or did your brain just stitch together a few scattered frames and call it a story? Cognitive psychology calls this confirmation bias. You notice what fits the pattern. You ignore what doesn't. And slowly the world starts behaving exactly as you expected. Not because it always did, but because your mind rehearsed that version best. The pattern pretends to be evidence. It says, see, I told you they'd ignore you. See, you always mess it up. See, this is who you are. But patterns are not truth. They are habits of perception. You think you are seeing the world, but more often you're seeing a repetition of your expectations. Even emotions have their favorite routes. You get triggered by a word, a sound, a pause, and the feeling floods in on schedule like an actor waiting for their cue, not because the present demands it, but because the pattern does. Your anger follows the same path. Your grief wears the same shoes. Even your joy repeats its choreography. And if it doesn't match the pattern, the mind grows suspicious. It says, that doesn't feel like me. Because you have become a pattern too. A collection of rehearsed reactions, wearing the name self. You repeat your stories in conversations. You anticipate conflict before it arrives. You prepare apologies before you speak. You brace for disappointment, even in moments of hope. Not because reality dictated it, but because the pattern did. And the most convincing patterns are the ones that hurt. Because pain is sticky. It imprints faster. It leaves sharper edges in memory. The brain evolved to remember what might threaten survival. So it replays the wound, highlights the betrayal, magnifies the rejection, even when the threat is gone. And in doing so, it rehearses that moment. Not once, but over and over, until it becomes the default scene. And then, the pattern starts pretending. It says, this is how people are. This is how love ends. This is how I fail. You stop questioning. Because the pattern feels true. But the truth is, it's just well practiced. So how do you notice the difference? You pay attention to repetition. You listen for phrases that return without invitation. You watch how you explain yourself with the same tired lines. You catch the moment you start pre-writing the ending. And in that noticing, the illusion loosens. You see that not every silence means rejection. Not every delay means failure. Not every smile is a trap. Some moments are new, but the pattern doesn't let you see them, because newness isn't familiar, and the unfamiliar is scary. So the mind would rather lie, would rather dress up an echo in the clothes of truth, would rather perform a pattern than face the unknown. Even healing can become a pattern. You rehearse progress. You say the right things. You become fluent in the language of growth. But underneath, you're still waiting for the same ending. Because the pattern isn't broken just by insight. It's broken by choosing differently when every part of you expects the same. By staying in the room. By speaking the thing. By not flinching when you normally do. That's the work. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just different. And the first time you do it, the pattern resists. It panics. It begs to be believed. But if you pause long enough, you hear it for what it is. Not truth. Just a rehearsal. And if it was rehearsed, you can rewrite it. The pattern only has power when it pretends to be the only option. But it never was. There's a breath on the other side of that loop. A word you've never said. A choice you've never made. And it's waiting. Not to be perfect. Just to be real. You think you're alone. Right now, lying in your bed, eyes flickering closed, mind half awake and drifting. But somewhere deep inside, something is watching. Not the world. You. There's an audience within you. A silent observer. An imagined presence that critiques, praises, judges, approves. You've felt it, haven't you? The sense that someone is always there, measuring your choices, scripting your responses, watching the performance even when no one else is in the room. That voice in your head that says, "You sounded stupid. That wasn't enough. Say it differently." Or worse, say nothing. Where did that voice come from? It didn't appear by accident. It was rehearsed. Constructed from the fragments of teachers, parents, friends, strangers, built from comments, glances, silences, each one layered into a kind of internal audience. And now, it never leaves the theatre. Even when you think you're being authentic, you're often just performing for this invisible crowd. You say what you think is acceptable. You feel what's expected. You behave not from freedom, but from the rehearsed applause of someone you can no longer name. This internal audience becomes so familiar, so constant, that you begin to mistake it for your own voice. But it isn't. It's the echo of every performance you survived. It's the crowd that taught you what real is supposed to feel like. So when something doesn't match the script, when you act out of character, when you choose stillness over urgency, honesty over likability, the audience gets restless. It whispers, "That's not like you. People won't understand. You'll regret this." And so you shrink. You rehearse safety. You say the thing that makes sense, instead of the thing that's true. Not because you're dishonest, but because you're still on stage and the spotlight feels warm. You learned early on that being seen had rules. Don't speak too loudly. Don't cry at the wrong time. Don't take up too much space. Be clever, but not intimidating. Be soft, but not weak. Be funny, but not weird. So you edited yourself. And with every edit, the internal audience clapped. Quietly, approvingly. Until you thought, this must be who I am. But that's not self. That's survival. That's performance. And performances, no matter how flawless, are still illusions. There's a strange kind of grief in realizing how much of your life has been lived for a crowd that doesn't exist. In how often you sought approval from people you've never met. In rooms you've never entered. For standards you didn't choose. But there's also a strange kind of freedom. Because if that audience was rehearsed, then it can be released. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But slowly, by noticing when the spotlight turns on. By asking, who am I performing for right now? By listening for the internal applause and choosing silence instead. Even solitude isn't safe from the performance. You can be alone and still act out the lines. Still live under the gaze of a voice that isn't yours. But here's something to remember. The audience within was created to keep you safe. It watched you because you needed guidance once. It warned you because the world once felt dangerous. It rehearsed responses to avoid rejection, humiliation, abandonment, and it did its job well. But the show has changed. You're no longer standing on the same stage. The lights are different. The room is quieter. You can breathe now. And in that breath, you can begin to choose. Not the version of you that wins the audience's praise, but the version that never needed one. The self that speaks without rehearsal. That laughs without explanation. That pauses mid-thought and doesn't rush to fill the space. You'll feel the urge to explain yourself. You'll hear the old audience groan. But let them. Let the theatre grow dark. Let the seats empty. Let the silence linger. And in that silence, you might hear yourself, for the first time, not as a character, not as a reaction, but as a presence, a consciousness that doesn't need to be performed, a being who isn't watched, only experienced. No stage, no curtain, no script. Just you. You worked for this. You endured. You bent yourself into shapes that didn't quite fit. You silenced questions. You followed the rules. You collected the rewards. And now, what you feel must be real, right? You earned it. That's the story we're told. That reality becomes true through effort. That the more pain you've gone through, the more solid your experiences become. That if it was hard, it must be meaningful. If it hurt, it must be real. But what if effort isn't the validator? What if what you feel earned is just the most rehearsed illusion of all? There's a strange trick the mind plays. It adds value to whatever it had to fight for. Not because it was valuable, but because the fight felt familiar. Like pain that mimics love. Like suffering mistaken for depth. Like the struggle you mistake for identity. This is called effort justification, and it runs deep. Psychologists discovered that when people suffer for something, initiation rituals, grueling training, emotional investment, they begin to believe that the outcome must be worthwhile. The brain hates waste. It refuses to believe it suffered for nothing. So it rewrites reality to match the effort. You tell yourself, I must really love this job. I worked so hard to get here. Or, they must be worth it. I've sacrificed too much to leave. But sometimes, you're just clinging to the illusion, because it took you years to build. Even the roles you play, worker, partner, teacher, survivor, they begin to feel sacred, not because they reflect who you are, but because of how long you've been wearing them. You feel you've earned this version of yourself. And so, it becomes dangerous to question it. Because if this isn't real, if this identity isn't true, then what was all the struggle for? What was all the pain for? That's the haunting question. And that's why people hold tightest to the illusions they paid most dearly for. Even when they no longer serve, even when they hurt, even when they shrink your soul, you stay. You repeat the lines. You protect the illusion because it cost you so much to build. But realness isn't earned. Realness doesn't arrive as a reward. It arrives when the performance ends. When you sit in the quiet and realize that not every belief needs defending, not every version of you deserves a sequel, you can let go of what you earned and still be whole, because truth doesn't need your sacrifice. Only your willingness to stop pretending. Somewhere along the way, repetition stopped being boring. It became comforting, predictable, safe, familiar. You don't brush your teeth each night because you're excited about it. You do it because your body remembers the rhythm. Because repetition promises something deeper than novelty. Control. The world is chaotic. People change. Memories blur. Emotions twist themselves into strange shapes. But repetition stays. It tells you, if this happened before, it will happen again. It offers a map through the noise. And slowly, repetition becomes truth. You drink from the same mug. You use the same phrases. You return to the same emotions, even the painful ones. Why? Because you know them. You've worn them in, like an old coat that fits your shape, even if it's a little tattered. And when something repeats enough times, it doesn't just feel familiar, it starts to feel right. Even if it hurts, you'll notice it in the way you respond to love. If you were once taught that love means being ignored, you might find yourself drawn to silence. If you were once praised only when you achieved, you might feel worthless without progress. Not because you want these patterns, but because they're known. The known is comfortable, and comfort becomes convincing. Your brain learns through loops. It doesn't ask, is this true? It asks, have I seen this before? And if the answer is yes, it relaxes. Because survival favors the familiar, even when the familiar is slowly undoing you. You've probably heard of the mere exposure effect. It's the idea that the more you're exposed to something, the more you like it. Not because it improves, but because it becomes easier to process. You don't love the same song after the 10th listen because it got better. You love it because the brain no longer has to work hard to understand it. That ease gets mistaken for enjoyment. That enjoyment gets mistaken for meaning. And that meaning becomes reality. But what if your entire life, your sense of who you are, has been shaped not by truth, but by what was simply repeated the most? The way you speak to yourself, the phrases you loop in your mind, the beliefs about what's possible for you, all rehearsed, all repeated, all woven into the background noise so tightly that you stop noticing they were there. You don't question a habit that shows up every day. You call it you. But repetition is not identity. It's choreography. You move through life on the same counts, hitting the same emotional beats, delivering the same internal monologues. And when a moment threatens that rhythm, when someone offers love without conditions, or when rest feels deserved instead of earned, you hesitate. You pull back, because it's not what you rehearsed. Even healing, when unfamiliar, can feel wrong. The pattern hasn't caught up yet. So the brain rejects what doesn't match the loop. It says, this doesn't feel real, when what it really means is, this doesn't feel rehearsed. And in that discomfort you return to the comfort of repetition, and to the emotion you know, to the ending you expect, to the pain that fits like home. Because breaking the loop doesn't just require insight, it requires discomfort. It requires choosing the awkward silence over the practiced reply, the pause over the impulse, the unfamiliar path over the one that's worn smooth. It requires standing at the edge of a moment and not reaching for the line you've said 100 times before. It requires letting go of what has always felt real, because real was just what you repeated the most. But here's the quiet truth. Repetition is not the enemy. It's just a tool. The same way you rehearsed fear, you can rehearse courage. The same way you repeated avoidance, you can repeat presence. The brain doesn't care which pattern you give it. It will master whichever one you practice. So maybe healing isn't about breaking repetition. Maybe it's about changing what you repeat. A softer tone, a slower breath, a new phrase whispered often enough to become familiar. And eventually, true. Because what feels real is not always what is. It's what's been said the most. Numbsting felt the longest, practiced without question. But the script can be rewritten. And every moment you choose differently. You begin a new line, a new loop, a new illusion. One that maybe, just maybe, leads you back to something real. It was never meant to be perfect the first time. That's what they say about life. But what if every moment you live, but the dress rehearsal? What if the reality you're experiencing right now is not the show, isn't the first time? Blocked, lit, scored, polished just enough to feel real. A meticulously staged version. But most of what you live has already been prepped, but flexible enough to be changed without consequence. You're told reality is raw, unfiltered, cleaned, predicted, rehearsed in your nervous system and subconscious, long before it ever reaches your conscious mind. When you speak, you choose words your tongue has learned to shape through years of practice. When you feel, it's often the familiar echo of an emotion you've already lived. This isn't spontaneity. Not a new one, but one that was ready. Your body walks the same routes. It's staging. Your mind anticipates the same responses. Your hands reach for the same solutions, even when the problems have changed. And slowly, this practice becomes indistinguishable from the performance. But make no mistake, reality, as you know it, has been through several rehearsals before it reaches you. Your brain runs mental simulations all day. Tiny dress rehearsals of conversations you haven't had yet. Fights that haven't happened. Victories that might not come. Failures you hope to avoid. And even though most of those moments never occur, they still leave traces, marking the space, like chalk on a stage floor, prepping the scene, informing the movement. So by the time the real moment arrives, you're already dressed for it. Already in character. You call it preparation. Already waiting for the cue. But what if it's limitation? You think you're choosing to be cautious. What if the rehearsals are shaping what you're allowed to experience? But really, you're reenacting an old pattern with a new face. But really, you're repeating a practiced fear. You think you're falling in love. You think you're starting fresh. But your body's already playing the same lines from a past chapter. And all of it feels real. Because the rehearsal was good. In theatre, a dress rehearsal mimics the final show as closely as possible. Lights, costumes, sound cues, everything is polished, until the difference between practice and performance disappears. That's what your brain does too. It sets the lights, projects the script, plays the soundtrack. And reality, your reality walks onto the stage, never realizing it was the preview all along, believing it's the main act. But here's the subtle truth hiding beneath it. The dress rehearsal becomes the reality when you stop noticing the difference, and so you fill it. When your mind predicts an awkward silence, and so you protect yourself in advance. When it anticipates disappointment, when it simulates rejection so vividly, you're not responding to life. You walk away before anyone can turn you down. You're responding to the version of life your brain already rehearsed. The actors never changed. The set remained the same. Only the lines evolved slightly. And you were always the lead. This rehearsal gives comfort. It reduces surprise. Something precious. But it also steals something. It allows you to move through the world with some illusion of control. Something irreplaceable. The breath before the decision. The rawness of the moment. The silence between the beats. The pause before the answer. That's where real life happens. Not in the polished performance, but in the line you didn't expect to say, the thought that wasn't planned, the feeling that wasn't shaped by any previous scene. You've lived most of your life preparing for reality, and in doing so, you've mistaken the rehearsal for the real thing. But what if you stopped? Let the lights come up without knowing where to stand? What if you walked on stage without your lines? Felt something without predicting how you're supposed to feel? Disorienting. It would be terrifying. And vulnerable. Reality, after all, is not the most convincing illusion. And that's exactly what makes it real. It's the one that can still surprise you. The silence that speaks louder than the line. It's the mistake that teaches. The broken rhythm that feels more alive than the choreographed flow. You've been rehearsing long enough? Maybe it's time to stop asking what's supposed to happen, and start noticing what is happening. Unrehearsed, unfiltered, uncomfortable, alive. And in that unscripted breath, you may finally meet the you who was never pretending. There's a moment in every performance when an actor forgets their line. It's not planned. It's not scripted. It just slips. The silence stretches. The eyes flicker. The body tenses in the gap between what was supposed to happen and what actually did. And in that gap, something real leaks in. You've felt it. In the middle of a conversation, when the words you usually reach for vanish, when your usual reaction stalls, when your script goes quiet. And for a second, you're not playing the role. You're just there. Breathing. Unprepared. Alive. That forgotten line, that unscripted moment, reveals how much of your life is memorized. Not in a conscious way. You don't walk around quoting yourself. But inside, you know your beats. You know how you usually respond when someone apologizes. You know the story you tell about your past. You know which parts of you are safe to show, and which ones stay tucked behind the curtain, until the script falters, until the line doesn't come. And then, what happens? Panic, maybe? Confusion? Or something quieter? A flicker of presence? The realization that you don't have to fill every silence. That not knowing what to say is a kind of honesty. That forgetting the line might be the first true thing you've done all day. But we're trained to recover, to rush back into character, to smooth the moment over with a nervous laugh or a familiar phrase. We're taught that forgetting the line is failure, and that silence is weakness. That presence, unless rehearsed, is dangerous. But what if it isn't? What if the line you forgot was never yours to begin with? What if it was something you learnt to say, to fit in, to avoid conflict, to protect the role? You see, every character is built on rhythm. You say something, they say something. You react, they react. scene after scene after scene. But every once in a while, you drop the rhythm. You forget your cue. And in that drop, you remember yourself, not the version that performs, the version that watches from behind the curtain. And maybe that version doesn't know what to say. Maybe that version doesn't care if the audience is waiting. Because maybe, just maybe, the audience was never real. Just another part of the illusion. Another echo of approval you rehearsed so many times you forgot it was optional. So what if forgetting the line isn't the mistake? What if remembering it day after day, moment after moment, is what's been keeping you from being here? You don't need to say what you always say. You don't need to finish the sentence. You don't need to tie the thought into a perfect loop. You can pause. You can stumble. You can let the silence linger longer than what feels comfortable, because in that space, something deeper than the line appears. Something unpolished. Something unrehearsed. Something unrehearsed. Something true. And that's terrifying. Because when the script fails, you have no shield, no rhythm to hide behind, no character to wear. But that's also freedom, because when the line disappears, so does the illusion. And what remains is not emptiness. It's possibility. The possibility that who you are is not a memorized phrase, not a repeated reaction, not a voice trained to echo approval, but something softer, something quieter, something still becoming. So tonight, if you forget your line, don't panic. Don't scramble. Don't rehearse your way out of the silence. Stay with it. Sit in the flicker. Let the moment unfold without direction. And notice, there's nothing to fix. You are not broken for not knowing what to say. You are not lost because the words didn't arrive. You are not unworthy just because the illusion paused. You are simply here. And sometimes, that's enough. You like to believe your instincts are pure, unfiltered, real. You say things like, I just knew. I felt it in my gut. As if those moments arrived untouched by thought. As if they emerged from some ancient, honest part of you. But instincts lie, not out of malice, but out of memory. Because instinct is not nature. It's practice. It's rehearsal. It's everything your body learned to do before your mind could explain why. When you flinch at the tone of someone's voice. When you shut down during conflict. When you step aside without knowing why. You're not reacting from truth. You're reacting from rehearsed survival. And over time, those rehearsals become invisible. They start to feel like instinct. Like who you are. But who you are is not just reflex. It's context. It's history layered in muscle and breath. But your instincts were shaped by what once kept you safe, even if it no longer applies. Even if now, they trap you. You might avoid connection, not because you hate intimacy, but because somewhere in your timeline, connection came with pain. You might resist praise, not because you lack self-worth, but because you learnt that attention made you a target. So your instincts learned to act, to perform safety, to mimic certainty. They became little stage cues buried in your nervous system. A tightening here, a numbing there, a disappearing act perfected long before you ever had words for what was happening. And still, you call it just how I am. But instincts, like all actors, can forget their lines. And when they do, something strange appears. A moment that doesn't follow the script. A choice you never knew you had. That's where real presence begins. But presence is uncomfortable. Because when instinct is removed, you're left with space. And space is where truth lives. Not the practiced truth. Not the truth that wins approval. But the slow, quiet truth that has no performance left in it. It trembles. It hesitates. It breathes. But to reach it, you must interrupt the performance. You must step between stimulus and response and ask, is this who I am? Or who I learnt to be? The body doesn't like that question. It twitches. It floods. It protests. Because instinct prefers rhythm. And rhythm prefers the known. This is why it's easier to repeat old arguments. To chase old lovers. To return to the same patterns with new faces. Not because you're weak, but because your instincts were trained to recognize those roles. They know the script. They know the script. They hit their marks. Even your resistance is a performance. How often have you said no? Not from clarity, but from reflex? How often have you smiled not from joy, but from expectation? How many of your instincts are just deeply memorized choreography? The tragedy isn't that we perform, it's that we forget we're performing, and when we forget, we mistake habit for identity. But instincts are not fixed. They're fluid, plastic, trainable. You can rewire them, not by force, but by awareness, by slowing down the moment between impulse and action, by breathing instead of bracing, by letting the discomfort rise, crest, and pass. That's where the new instinct begins, not as performance, but as possibility. The possibility that safety doesn't have to look like hiding, that honesty doesn't have to sound like defense, that you can stay in the room after saying the thing, that you don't have to vanish after being seen. You are not broken. You are just over-rehearsed. And every time you pause, even for a second, you give the actor a chance to stop performing. You let the body rest. You let instinct soften. And in that softness, you discover something deeper than reaction. You discover response. Not the response you practiced. Not the one that kept you safe, but the one that sets you free. You think you're living today, but more often than not, you're reliving yesterday. You wake up and the world feels familiar. Not in memory, but in echo, is still holding the lines from the last act. And not because it's the same, but because the version of you stepping into it, yesterday's disappointments, yesterday's silence, yesterday's beliefs. And so, without realizing it, they follow you like shadows with voices, whispering what to expect before the moment even arrives. But because the script was already in your hand, you greet new experiences with old responses, not because you chose them. Not because you chose them. One echo at a time. This is how the illusion builds itself. You think you're choosing. You think you're feeling something new, but you're rehearsing. But your body is just reciting a sensation it practiced long ago. That same anxiety in your chest when someone takes too long to reply. That same flinch when your name is spoken sharply. That same smile when you want to disappear. They're yesterday's echoes. These aren't today's instincts. Echoes that became so convincing, and because they feel real, you forgot there was ever a time before them. You believe they are real. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you checked the script you were living from? When was the last time you questioned why you still feel small in spaces that no longer ask you to shrink? Why you still say I'm fine when you're not? Why you still expect rejection when someone is kind? You're just stuck in a loop of practiced reactions. You're not broken. A loop that began with a single moment. Maybe small, maybe sharp, maybe sharp. A moment that told your nervous system, this is what happens here. It carried that scene into the next day, and so it adapted. It memorized. And the next, and now, it's here, still convincing, still playing, still whispering what the moment is supposed to feel like. It's momentum, the momentum of unexamined pain. But that whisper isn't truth, of unreleased memory, of identity wrapped around an echo. You call it intuition. But sometimes intuition is just trauma, rehearsed into confidence. You call it a bad feeling. But sometimes that feeling belongs to a version of you that no longer exists. You call it knowing better. But sometimes what you know is simply what you've been told too many times to forget. And yet there's something remarkable here. Because once you notice the echo, you can begin to soften it. You can say, this reaction doesn't belong to today. This fear isn't about this person. This sadness isn't from this moment. A breath. A beat between the echo and the next line. And in doing so, you create space. That's where truth begins. Not in the loudest feeling, but in the quiet question beneath it. What if I don't respond the way I always do? What if I let the echo fade? What if today doesn't need yesterday's voice? It's uncomfortable, because the script is easier. It tells you how to behave, how to protect yourself, how to disappear just enough to feel safe. But safety bought through rehearsal is just confinement in costume. It doesn't set you free. It just makes the cage feel earned. So tonight, as you lie here, listen for the echoes. Not to believe them, But to recognize them, notice how certain thoughts arrive dressed in yesterday's tone. Notice how your body tenses before the present even speaks. But because the version of you stepping into it hasn't changed costumes. Then ask, notice how the world feels familiar. Not because it is. What would today feel like if I wasn't trying to survive yesterday? You may not know the answer. That's okay. It's about letting silence return to the space it once filled. It's not about replacing the echo with a louder voice. There might be something new, not rehearsed, and in that silence, just here, not expected, not repeated. Behind every performance, there's someone pulling the curtains, adjusting the lights. They don't speak, moving the props before anyone steps on stage. They don't take a bow. They stay in the shadows. But without them, the show doesn't run. That's what your brain does. Not the narrator in your head, not the conscious part, but the quiet mechanisms beneath thought, the hidden stagehand. You go about your life believing you're center stage, making choices, feeling feelings, directing your own story. But the truth is, most of the story is being prepared for you, long before a decision reaches your awareness, before you even arrive in the scene. Your brain has already made a guess, a prediction, a tilt, a whisper that says, this is probably how you feel about it. This is probably what's happening, and you accept it. This is probably the right line to say, not because you're lazy, but because the stage was already set. It's one of the leading theories in neuroscience now. This is how predictive processing works. It's predicting it. The idea that your brain isn't reacting to the world, you're always a step ahead. Then trying to create a sense of stability, trying to reduce surprise, in a universe that offers none. And it does this by pulling from your past, from your rehearsals, from what you've seen, heard, and survived. You feel like you're seeing reality, but what you're really seeing is the brain's best guess, based on everything it's already staged before. The color you think you see, that's a reconstruction. The meaning behind someone's silence, that's a projection. The instinct that tells you to pull away or lean in, that's a signal crafted in the wings of 1,000 past performances. And because the brain is so good at building the set, you don't notice the illusion. You mistake prediction for perception. But here's the paradox. You mistake rehearsal for truth. The more invisible it becomes, the more you believe that what you're experiencing, the more the brain gets it right, is simply how things are. It's like watching a magician you trust, not how you've been taught to expect them. And so the trick works even better. You stop looking for the trick. This hidden stagehand, your unconscious neural machinery, runs the lights. It cues your memory. It chooses which emotions enter the scene. It filters what is allowed to feel real. And when something doesn't match the rehearsal, it gets ignored, edited, muted. You feel what you're familiar with. You see what you expect. You respond in the ways you've always rehearsed. Because that's the safest way to keep the illusion of control. Even discomfort is easier than surprise. So when love feels unfamiliar, you brace. When peace arrives unannounced, you doubt it. When stillness whispers, you cover it with noise. Not because those things are untrue, but because the stagehand didn't prepare for them. And when the brain doesn't predict something, it doesn't feel real. It feels wrong. Not in the expected, but what if that's where truth actually lives? The moment your mind stumbles, but in the unscripted. The moment your body pauses. Why did I react like that? That's not failure. The moment you catch yourself asking, that's the glitch. To show you there's a stagehand behind the curtain. The spotlight flickering just enough. You can start asking better questions. And once you see it, not just what am I feeling, but why did my brain decide this was the appropriate scene? Where did this script come from? Because if your reactions were predicted, who taught my nervous system that this is what safety looks like? They can be questioned. You can choose to dim them. If the lights were set before you arrived, if the stage is built from echoes, and maybe you can stop acting long enough, you can start listening for silence, to step behind the curtain, the one that didn't get a name, and meet the version of you that's been working in the dark. And but knows the whole show by heart. The one that didn't get applause. The one that never got to speak. Maybe they're just tired. Maybe they're waiting for you. And maybe they're not your enemy. If I wasn't just following the marks on the floor, what else could this scene be? To stop performing long enough to ask, because behind every performance, beneath every illusion, there's someone backstage you just did. And tonight, just waiting to be noticed, you feel something rise in your chest. Tight, sharp, familiar. Maybe sadness. Maybe anger. And maybe that ghost of disappointment that always shows up in the same clothes. And instantly your mind starts filling in the story. This is happening because they don't care. Because I'm being ignored again. Because I always mess things up. But pause. Slow it down. Because here's the hidden trick your brain plays. Emotions often reuse old scenes. That hurt in your chest? It's not always about what's happening now. It's an echo from somewhere else. A line rehearsed too many times. In too many rooms. By too many versions of you. You think you're reacting to this moment. But your nervous system might be pulling up a recycled script. A reflex stitched together from every time you felt unseen, unheard, unwanted. The mind wants to believe emotions are precise. That sadness means something specific. That anger is a direct result of injustice. That fear has a clear source. But feelings are rarely fresh. They are layered, conditioned, drawn from a memory bank you don't remember opening. You're not sad because of this silence. You're sad because silence has always meant abandonment. You're not angry because someone spoke too bluntly. You're angry because their tone matched a voice from 20 years ago. You're not anxious because the room is loud. You're anxious because your body once learned that noise is danger. But instead of asking, where have I felt this before? You tell yourself, this must be real, because the emotion feels true. And what feels true must be happening now. Right? But no. That's the illusion. The illusion that every feeling you have is tied to the present. When in reality, most of your emotional responses are borrowed from yesterday's weather. And because the brain favors efficiency over clarity, it keeps reusing scenes. It says, we've been here before. Use that same panic. Play that same tension. Cue the tears from scene 7, page 3. It doesn't care if it's accurate. It just cares that the show runs on time. And so, you perform. You feel the same emotion in the same way, delivered with the same facial expression, justified by the same internal monologue. But somewhere deep down, you know it's not quite aligned. You know this moment isn't exactly like that one. You know this person doesn't deserve the full weight of your reaction. You know the story you're telling yourself doesn't fully match what's unfolding now. And that knowing, that flicker of dissonance, is the crack in the illusion. It's the moment when the actor realizes they've walked into the wrong scene, but kept reading the lines anyway. You don't have to feel ashamed. This isn't failure. It's just rehearsal. It's just your body trying to protect you, with the only script it knows. But what if you paused? What if, in that exact moment when the emotion rises, you asked, is this feeling mine, or someone else's memory? Is this reaction from now, or a story I've played out too many times? Not to silence the emotion, not to discredit it, but to contextualize it, to place it gently in its proper scene, because not every fear needs to take center stage. Not every tear needs to become the plot. Not every wave of anxiety needs to become a flood. Some feelings are old actors, still showing up, even though the show closed years ago. And you? You're the director now. You can thank them for their service. You can honor what they once protected. But you don't have to cast them in every scene. New stories need new emotions. Emotions that aren't preloaded. That aren't conditioned by what happened when you were too young to choose. Emotions that belong to the moment, not the memory. And those emotions are quieter, less rehearsed, harder to trust at first, because they don't have the rhythm of repetition behind them. But they are yours, not inherited, not recycled, not scripted. Yours. And if you give them space, just once, they'll show you what it feels like to respond rather than repeat. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the illusion ends. Ends. Each night, your body sleeps. But your mind steps onto a different kind of stage. No script. No curtain to lift. Because it never truly falls. And yet, even here, you're rehearsing. In the quiet dark, your dreams are not random. They are not meaningless static. They are patterns with motion. Symbols with rhythm. Simulations stitched together by a brain that cannot stop preparing for the next act. In your dreams, you practice conversations you've never had. You replay moments that haven't happened yet, still feel hauntingly familiar. And sometimes, you forgive. You fear, you flee, you fight, all while the body lies still. But the mind never stops performing. You might wake up breathless. But nothing happened. Gripping the edge of your mattress like it's the edge of a cliff. Heart pounding. Not here. Not really. And yet it felt real. Why? Why? Because the rehearsal was convincing. Because the mind doesn't wait for daylight to begin staging your reality. It does it while you sleep. Some researchers call dreams threat rehearsal, a biological simulation designed to help you survive. The mind conjures problems, dangers, breakdowns, then lets you practice your responses without real consequences. So you're emotionally prepared. You dream about falling. You dream about betrayal, so your instincts sharpen. You dream about being lost, because your psyche is trying to map meaning onto something that feels beyond control. Even your dreams are trying to keep the illusion together. I know they blend memory with metaphor, emotion with fragments of reality. And when they work, you carry the residue into waking life. You say, I had a weird dream last night. But what you mean is, you see someone from your dream the next day. I rehearsed something while I was unconscious, and the rehearsal lingers and feels something strange. Unresolved, unexplained, because the brain doesn't always separate the dream from the real. It just records the emotional tone, and when enough dreams follow the same patterns, they become part of the illusion. You develop feelings for people who only exist in sleep. You avoid actions that ended badly in a dream. You create narratives built from moments that never actually happened, at least not here. But your body doesn't care, because rehearsal, whether in dreams or waking life, feels real to the nervous system. It responded as if they did. And reality, at least the version your brain believes, is built from feeling. So what does it mean when the illusions you trust during the day are shaped by the ones you lived through at night? It means the line between real and rehearsed is thinner than you think. You might feel a gut instinct about someone, but maybe it's a dream you forgot. You might carry anxiety through the morning, but maybe it was born in the scene your mind just staged 3 hours before you opened your eyes. You are not always reacting to what's in front of you. Sometimes you're reacting to the script your subconscious ran while you were asleep. But there's beauty in this too. They can also rehearse hope, because if dreams can rehearse fear, run without resistance, you've had those dreams. The ones where you speak without hesitation, forgive without being asked. You wake up lighter, as if something resolved beneath awareness. Because not all rehearsal is protection, and maybe it did. Sometimes it's preparation. Preparation for the version of you who doesn't perform, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't recite the same tired lines, and the one who remembers how to feel before the mind interrupts with meaning. They are rehearsals from a deeper stage. A rehearsal not of words. You see, dreams are not mistakes, but of possibility. Your body remembers the rehearsal, and even if you forget the scenes, your tone softens. Your instincts surprise you. Your choices shift, because something changed in the dark. And for a moment, something rehearsed freedom. So tonight, when you fall asleep, your waking self gets to follow that script instead. Know that the stage doesn't close, but it just becomes quieter, more fluid, less conscious, still rehearsing, still offering you lines you haven't tried yet. But it's still there. Just maybe, those lines are the ones that will finally, and maybe, break the illusion. The audience shuffles out. Watch, the lights dim, There's a certain kind of silence that arrives when the performance ends, and you're left standing there. The clapping fades, on a stage that suddenly feels too big, too honest. That's where truth waits. Too quiet, not under the spotlight, but behind the curtain, not in the lines you've practiced. You spend so much of your life performing, in the shadows of the show, not just for others, that this version of you is the real one, but for yourself, convincing your own reflection, the confident one, the capable one, the one who doesn't tremble when no one is watching. But every performance hides something, and if you look closely enough, you can feel the weight of what isn't being said, the sadness behind the smile, the hesitation behind the joke, the memory behind the anger. You say your lines, you move the props, you pretend these things aren't there. You master the illusion of I'm fine. It does not perform. But truth is not interested in applause. It waits, quietly, in the wings. The curtain is heavy for a reason, because behind it, until the performance tires itself out, all the versions of you are all the things you didn't get to say. All the thoughts you couldn't admit, that never got cast in the role. And truth doesn't need an audience. It doesn't want to be believed. As much it wants to be seen. The moment you stop acting, even for a second. Truth moves closer. It doesn't speak in grand declarations. It whispers. It shows up in the way your body softens, when you're alone and no longer pretending. And it arrives in the breath you didn't realize you were holding, in the way your shoulders drop, the second you stop trying to be understood. But here's the paradox. You're taught that truth must be loud, that it must be said with certainty, that it must be convincing, shaky. But real truth is often uncertain, unscripted. It's the line you've never said out loud. It trembles when spoken, because it hasn't been rehearsed. The feeling you always skip over, the silence you keep filling with performance, and it only becomes real when you stop trying to polish it. You begin by noticing when you're acting. So how do you find the truth behind the curtain? You pause in the middle of the sentence. You sit in the discomfort of not knowing and ask, who am I saying this for? Even when no one's around to see it. And resist the urge to fill it with familiar words. You let the mask slip. The biggest audience lives inside you. Because sometimes the part of you that claps every time you perform the version of yourself that doesn't need help. That doesn't feel lost. That doesn't feel too much or not enough. But that version isn't real. It's a role. And the more you play it, the harder it is to remember what you were before the audition. So maybe it's time to let the curtain fall, to step off the stage and into the unlit space behind it. It will be quiet there, uncomfortable. But emptiness is not absence. Empty, where you can feel before you explain. A place where you don't have to know what to say. It's possibility, without having to be impressive. Where you can be seen, that's where truth begins. And once you feel it, but in the release. But in the release, not in the role, without the costume. Once you see yourself, without the lines, the performance was necessary. You'll wonder why you ever thought, without the audience. And that's where the real story starts. Because behind the curtain, there's no need to pretend that when you say something off the cuff, you think spontaneity is freedom, or change your mind mid-sentence, or laugh without planning to. That it came from somewhere real, unfiltered, raw, ready wonthtorshal. You. But spontaneity is often the most convincing illusion of all, because the mind is rarely unprepared. It's simply fast. So fast that by the time the thought arrives, the rehearsal is already forgotten. You say, but your nervous system has been preparing that reaction for years. I just felt like doing it. Silently, efficiently, without requiring your permission. You think spontaneity is choice, are nothing more than rehearsed instincts, but many of your so-called impulses, delivered in fresh packaging. But maybe that spark isn't love. Maybe it's a familiar emotional pattern being replayed. You feel a spark with someone new. Recognition, mistaken for revelation. The comfort of repetition disguised as destiny. You change careers on a whim. But deep down, make a dramatic choice. Feel the rush of doing something bold. You may just be responding to a script. It's not your fault. Your brain started writing long before you called it freedom. The brain is a pattern detection machine, and it survives by prediction. So even in moments that feel spontaneous, it's using history to shape possibility, and pulls out the lines you liked best. It reaches into memory, the ones that earned you approval, the ones that kept you safe, and plays them again. And because the scenery is different, you believe the performance is new. But spontaneity isn't always the absence of planning. Sometimes it's the result of deeply rehearsed improvisation. You've learned how to be spontaneous in ways that are still acceptable, still attractive, and still protected, still safe. Even your messiness is sometimes curated. You show your flaws just enough to appear honest, but never enough to feel exposed. You say what's on your mind, but only the parts that won't unravel the illusion too quickly, but only in places where failure won't leave scars. You act brave, not because you're lying, and so the illusion continues, but because the lie has become muscle memory. The truth is terrifying. Spontaneity. Real spontaneity. Because it means surrendering the script. It means not knowing what you'll say next, not having the perfect reply, not performing curiosity, but actually not knowing. And that's rare. And that's rare, because you've been taught to know, to predict, to prepare. You were rewarded for certainty, punished for pause, celebrated for clarity, even if the clarity was rehearsed. To raise its voice just enough to seem passionate. So your spontaneity learned to smile on cue, to lean forward at just the right moment. But real spontaneity? It shakes and says, I don't actually know. It fumbles. It pauses in the middle of a sentence. It admits confusion without needing to justify it. It sits in a room and doesn't try to fill the silence. It changes its mind and doesn't need a reason. Rare, uncomfortable. And that kind of freedom? Because it's not just unrehearsed, sacred, it's unguarded. But that's the version of you that doesn't perform. The one who doesn't calculate how your truth will sound before speaking it. That's the one who laughs without checking the room. The one who asks without needing to appear curious. And the more you meet that version, the more you begin to notice. You stop rushing to react. How much of your spontaneity was a costume? You stop needing every thought to arrive fully formed. You stop mistaking urgency for authenticity. And in the gaps, no punchline, who has nothing to prove. You find the tin cot, no performance, no prepared identity to defend, just presence. The kind that doesn't need to be anything more, the kind that doesn't rehearse, the kind that isn't impressive, than here. Not in grand revelations, and maybe that's where the real illusion breaks. But in the tiny moment, when you pause before answering and ask yourself, but because it isn't, is this really me? Not because it sounds spontaneous, because it's finally, quietly, honestly, real. You choose who to love, when to leave, what to believe, and when to let go. You choose what you wear. You choose what to say. You're told every day that you're free, that your choices define you, or at least it feels that way. That each moment is an opportunity to assert your agency. But what if many of your choices were never truly yours? To be someone, to become someone. What if what you call a choice, what if they were inherited, scripted, rehearsed, is often just the most practiced option? You reach for a familiar flavor, wearing the costume of freedom, but maybe it's just what your parents liked. You feel drawn to a certain type of person, but maybe it's because your nervous system recognizes that shape. You avoid risk, not because it's dangerous, but because you've been taught that safety lives in repetition. And still, you call it a choice, because it feels chosen, and the feeling is convincing. Cognitive science calls this the illusion of conscious will. The belief that because we can explain a decision, we must have authored it. But the explanation often comes after the action. The brain makes its move, then sends the signal to your consciousness to justify it. Because it arrives wearing your voice, and you believe the story. A script had already been flipped open to this page. You don't notice the stage was already set. The lighting was already arranged, saying, "This is who I am." Confident, certain, and so you step into the role. This is what I've chosen. But how many of your decisions were born from autonomy? And how many were built from expectation? You chose your job. You chose your partner. But how much of that choice was influenced by what was modeled for you? But how much of that choice was shaped by what felt familiar, not what felt free? You chose your beliefs. But how much of that was repetition rewarded with belonging? You see, choice is never neutral. It arrives covered in memory, cloaked in culture, whispered through the voice of past selves who never stop speaking. You want to believe you steer the ship, but often you're responding to winds that were charted decades before you even noticed the ocean. And yet there's no shame in that. There's no guilt in not knowing how much of your life has been rehearsed. Because awareness isn't about blame, it's about pause. The moment you catch yourself choosing, and ask, is this mine? Is this decision arising from clarity, or born here? Was this feeling placed here, or from comfort? The one that tells you a decision feels right. Because that comfort might not be wisdom. It might just be the echo of a script you've recited too many times to forget. The same rhythm, the same story arc. And yet, it still feels real. The same emotional payoff. But real choice isn't always comfortable, because your body remembers how this scene goes, and your mind loves what it already knows. Sometimes it feels foreign. It doesn't always feel right in the beginning. Awkward, empty, the one that doesn't know its ending. Because real choice is the one that hasn't been rehearsed, the one that disrupts the loop instead of continuing it. But by the space it creates. You'll know it not by the certainty it brings. A breath, a breath, a break, it will ask something of you, and it won't feel chosen. A bold step into the unscripted, not at first, and walking into the unfamiliar, because you're stepping away from the autopilot. But that's where freedom lives. Not in what feels good, but in what feels new. So tonight, ask yourself gently, which of your choices feel rehearsed? Which ones feel like echoes, and not from the pressure to fill it? You don't have to change everything. Which ones were born from silence? You don't have to abandon the script entirely. But you can begin to notice when the role you're playing, and in that noticing, you begin to choose again, doesn't match the voice rising from within you. Not because the world demanded it, not because the past expected it, but because, in this moment, you'd never said before. You were finally ready to speak a line. You see a face in a crowd and feel something stir. A stranger, but not really. A moment that feels new, but not entirely. A decision you swear you've made before, and you whisper to yourself, even though the context has changed. I've been here before. Recognition. That eerie warmth. Ask yourself quietly, but pause. That soft certainty that this, whatever this is, belongs to you. Is this recognition? You see, the brain loves what it already understands. Or is it rehearsal? It loves to spot patterns, to link moments, to say, this fits the mold. This belongs to the story. This makes sense. And so it pulls from memory. Not always accurate memory, but emotionally familiar memory. You don't recognize the face. You recognize the feeling. You don't know the moment. And that rhythm tells your body, you know the rhythm. This is safe. This is me. Yes, this is real. But recognition is a loop, a closed system, and it doesn't always mean truth. It often just means, I've felt this before, even if that feeling was born in a lie, even if it came from pain. This is how the illusion strengthens itself. You walk into new experiences, looking for familiar roles. You listen to emotions and assign them to old stories. You look at people and categorize them before they speak. Already halfway through the scene, you enter each moment, already filling in the blanks. And because it feels known, you trust it. But what if what feels known, you say, is what keeps you stuck? This feels right. You say, but maybe it's just what you've always done. I know this type of situation, but maybe you've only known one version of it, and rehearsed it too many times to see anything else. Even your healing can become recognition. You seek relationships that resemble old wounds, just to play them out differently this time. You chase situations that mirror your past, hoping to rewrite the ending. But you're still inside the loop, still trapped in a cycle, where the familiar is mistaken for the true. This is called the recognition heuristic. It's a mental shortcut, a cognitive trick. We assume it must be better. If something feels familiar, safer, but familiarity isn't proof, more valid. It's just comfort wearing a mask. And comfort rehearsed long enough feels like destiny. You begin to only see what you already believe. You begin to only respond to the versions of realities you've already met. You begin to only trust what echoes the past. And the illusion tightens. Because what you recognize is not always what's real. The nod from the audience, it's what's repeated. Recognition is the applause that keeps the show running. The smile from your internal director, whispering, "Yes, stay in character. You've played this scene before." But what happens when you stop recognizing, and nothing feels familiar? When you pause in the middle of the story? When the face doesn't remind you of anyone? When the emotion doesn't match your archives? You panic. You reach for the loop. You doubt. Because outside of it, but that unanchored moment? Everything feels unanchored. That's where truth begins. Not in what's familiar, but in what resists rehearsal. That awkward silence. That choice you've never made before. That unnameable feeling. That face you can't place. You are not here to perform the same role again and again. That's freedom. That's not a glitch. You are not a ghost retracing your own footsteps. You are not meant to only trust what reminds you of something else. You are here to notice, to pause before labeling, because they haven't been shaped by your past. To breathe into the moments that make no sense. That recognition no longer becomes your compass. You break the loop, and when you do, you let silence have meaning. You don't chase the familiar. You let the unfamiliar teach you. You let stillness feel safe, without needing to recognize the ending. You let the story unfold, because maybe the most honest parts of you, just maybe, are the ones that have never been recognized before. You walk into a room you've never been in before, but you know exactly where to sit. You begin a sentence you've never said, and the words line up without hesitation. You feel certain about something, even though you've never paused long enough to ask why. It doesn't just make things easier. It makes them feel true. That's the quiet trick of familiarity. Familiarity gives confidence, becomes mistaken for clarity, and confidence, when left unquestioned, because the mental steps are easy. You believe something because it feels smooth. Because it feels smooth. Because the emotional landscape has no bumps or interruptions. And you take that ease as a sign. This must be real. This must be right. This must be me. But confidence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's just comfort. You trust a thought more if it sounds like something you've already thought, well rehearsed and dressed in certainty. You trust a person more if they speak like someone you once loved. You trust an idea more if it echoes the beliefs you've rehearsed for years. This is the fluency illusion. Psychologists call it cognitive ease. The easier it is to process something, we confuse simplicity with truth. The more positively we judge it. Repetition with depth. Ease with insight. And so we begin to believe that the familiar is not just comfortable, but correct. You listen to your internal voice and mistake its volume for accuracy. You follow the same emotional patterns and assume they're reflections of your intuition. But familiarity does not equal fact. The thought that circled back so many times, it's just the echo that stayed too long. You forgot to ask if it belonged here at all. And the danger of this illusion is that you stop looking. You stop questioning the reaction. You stop doubting the belief that always arrives on time, that showed up early and stayed quiet. You stop examining the part of you that feels so sure, but only because it's been rehearsed longer than the others. You say, "This is just who I am." But maybe it's just who you've always heard yourself be. "I know what I'm doing." You say, but maybe you only know the rhythm, not the reality. Even doubt can feel unfamiliar. You return to the loop, so you push it away, and therefore wrong. You seek the version of yourself that doesn't stutter, that doesn't pause, that doesn't look behind the curtain. The things that are most real, but here's the paradox. The voice of truth is not always loud. They often arrive with hesitation. The movement toward change is not always smooth. Because real growth often feels unfamiliar, might not feel confident at all. The decision that frees you. So tonight, what would happen if you let yourself feel unsure? And unfamiliarity often feels wrong. If you let yourself question the part of you that speaks the fastest, what would happen if you said, but has it been rehearsed? This feeling feels strong. This thought feels certain. But is it just the most familiar? This choice feels natural. But who taught me that this was the only way? Confidence without awareness is just repetition in disguise. And when that repetition wears the mask of certainty, you stop evolving. You stay inside the version of you that never had to look beyond what was easy to believe, on the other side of unlearning. But there's more. There's a version of you, one who isn't shackled to the rhythm, but honestly, one who moves slowly, awkwardly, but freely. And their confidence? It doesn't come from how familiar something feels. It comes from how true they're willing to let it become. Even if it stings. Even if it doesn't sound like the old self. Even if it interrupts the illusion. So as you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself, where in your life have you mistaken confidence for truth? Where have you let fluency become your filter? Where have you followed the rhythm? But because it was easy? Not because it was real. Maybe don't reach for the most familiar thought first. And when you wake tomorrow, let silence speak. Let slowness interrupt the momentum. Let uncertainty stay a little longer. Because sometimes the truest thing, that you will, is the thing you've never felt confident saying out loud. Not yet. Say it twice, and it's a possibility. Say it once, and it's a thought. Say it 100 times. Not because it grew stronger. Not because it changed, and it becomes reality, but because your mind got used to the sound. This is the quiet force of repetition. It doesn't need to be true. It only needs to be familiar. And familiarity, rehearsed long enough, creates the illusion of truth. Once, then again, you tell yourself you're not enough, until your body carries that belief like posture, until your tone of voice wraps itself around those words. And then one day, you stop hearing it as a thought, like they belong to you. You just hear it as yourself. This is how the unreal becomes real. This is how illusion builds itself out of echoes. The repetition isn't accidental. It seeks patterns. Your brain was built for it. It favors fluency, more than what it's still trying to understand. It trusts what it's heard before. The more times something is repeated, that's the illusion of truth effect. The more likely your mind is to believe it, even if it's false, even if it came from pain, even if it came from someone else. And because your thoughts repeat more than anyone else's voice in your life, they become your reality. You create yourself. Through the lines you say most often, I always ruin things. I'm too much. No one really sees me. This is just how I am. Each line rehearsed. Each belief strengthened by nothing more than its frequency. And still, it feels solid. It feels earned. But what if it's not? What if it only feels true, because it's been played too many times? What if reality, as you experience it, isn't built from what's real, but from what's been repeated? Think of all the things you've accepted, not because you examined them, the expectations you carry, but because they showed up enough times to stop being questioned, the fears you never asked permission for, the beliefs that feel like instincts, but are really just rehearsed reactions, because it became the background. You don't notice the loop anymore. The music you forget is playing. So how do you hear it again? You pause until someone turns it off. You listen for the phrases that show up automatically, the ones that don't require thought, the ones that arrive without being invited. And then you ask, is this thought mine? Or just the most repeated one? You see, Repetition has no allegiance to truth. It will build any reality you allow it to. You can repeat hate, repeat self-doubt, and it will all begin to feel like home. Repeat shame, repeat a new sentence, but you can also repeat softness, repeat stillness. But because all truth, not because it's true right away, that hasn't had time to become strong yet, in your experience, must be rehearsed before it can be believed. So you whisper, I am learning. This moment is new. I am not the same. This story can change. Fake. And at first the words sound hollow, but that's only because they haven't had enough time to build reality yet. Let them echo. Foreign. Let them live in your body the way old pain used to. Not all at once. Let them return. But slowly, because repetition doesn't just create illusion. Rhythmically. You just have to choose what gets repeated, and unlearn what got memorized before you were old enough. It can also create freedom, to know it wasn't yours. You are not the worst thing you've heard the most. You are not broken. You are a mind rehearsing its own existence. You are a stage that can still change its script. And repetition can become the tool that rebuilds if you let it. If you let it, what illusion tried to take? There's a peculiar sensation that lives in your chest. Not quite emotion, not quite thought. It's the weight of something that feels true, even when you can't prove it. That sensation is called certainty. And it lies. Not always to hurt you. Not always with malice. But certainty doesn't arrive because something is real. Repetition isn't just how illusions survive. It arrives because something has been remembered enough. It's how memories get rewritten. You don't recall events as they were. Each time you revisit a memory, you recall them as they were last remembered. You edit it, color it, distort it slightly, pull it closer to your current narrative. That's the reconsolidation effect, where remembering something actually reshapes it. So what you're certain of, what feels foundational and real, might be no more than a polished lie you've told yourself, with just enough repetition to make it echo like truth. Think about it. You're certain your childhood was a blur. Why that one? Except for that one embarrassing moment. Because it was replayed the most. Retold, refelt, rehearsed in silence. You're certain someone never cared for you, because that belief helped the pain make sense. Nursed it, strengthened it through storytelling. So you kept it, and now it feels true. But what if certainty is just a loyal illusion? Trained through memory's rituals? What if the mind doesn't care about truth? Only about continuity? It prefers a believable story to an accurate one. What certainty gives you that? It smooths the edges. But sometimes, knowing is just the feeling of not questioning anymore. It makes you feel like you know. It anchors the narrative. You hold beliefs not because they're verified, but because they've survived repetition. And the longer they stay, the harder it becomes to separate memory from invention. So much of what you call you is a stack of remembered scripts, stories replayed, certainties passed down, emotions worn into grooves like stone steps. You walk those grooves every day, and because the path is familiar, you assume it's real. But familiarity isn't proof. It's only evidence of practice. You are not the certainty. You are the one standing behind it. Ask yourself, wondering when it first arrived, what story feels too heavy to challenge? What belief do I carry simply because I've carried it too long to set down? Not because it's true, when it's mistaken for fact, but because it's rehearsed? Certainty becomes a prison. You believe you'll never change. Believe people will always leave. Believe failure is inevitable. Just repeated lines in a play. But what if these aren't conclusions? You've been performing since Act 1, that you're also the writer? And what if you forgot, the director? Memory is flexible. The one who can whisper, this isn't the only version. So tell something new. It bends to attention. It reflects the storyteller. Yes, it will feel false at first, by the possibility of change. Let the memory of certainty be interrupting, unstable, empty of that heavy comfort. But that's because it hasn't been repeated yet. It hasn't had time to settle into your stage. Certainty isn't proof. It's residue. The emotional stickiness left behind by practiced thoughts. To change the feeling, change the rhythm. I don't have to believe this, just because it's always been believed. Say it again. Say it again. Also what a grade. And say it softer. Say it louder. Say it louder. I am not loyal to lies that wear the costume of truth. I am allowed to forget what no longer serves me. Let that new memory be rehearsed. Let that repetition begin. Has never been what you're most certain of. Let that illusion fade. Because maybe what's real, but what you're finally willing to rehearse differently. Imagine this. You stand on a stage beneath a single spotlight. Your mouth delivering lines you didn't write. The velvet curtain is drawn wide open. Your hands gesturing with conviction. You don't remember choosing. You can't see the audience, but you feel them watching. Waiting. You bow. Not because the scene changed their life, but not because the performance meant something. They clap. Not praise. The applause is habit. They clap because they've seen the show before. It's noise rehearsed by an audience trained to reward the familiar. And that audience? It's you. It's your inner monologue. And it's the echo chamber of thoughts that cheer. Every time you behave according to the script you've practiced the longest. They applaud when you self-sabotage, when you retreat, but because it's predictable. When you accept a truth you never questioned. They clap, not because it's right. Every mental loop you've nurtured over the years, every repeated fear, every gut reaction, has become part of a performance. Not for others, but for the audience within. And here's the twist. That audience is just as rehearsed as the script. They know when to gasp, when to weep, when to cheer. They follow your patterns like a ritual. When you hesitate to dream, good, stay safe. They whisper. When you decline joy, they nod approvingly. Approvingly. That's consistent. When you flinch at love, they applaud your loyalty to old pain. They don't want surprises. They want repetitions. They want you to keep playing the same character, in the same scene, with the same outcome. Because to the inner audience, change is chaos. Growth is risk. Authenticity is off-script. And silence terrifies them. Terrifies them. Because if you pause long enough, if you dare to ask, if you forget your lines, why am I doing this? There will be nothing for them to applaud. And that threatens everything. So they push you. They cheer for your fears. They root for your wounds. They call discomfort truth, because it's easier than rewriting the play. But what if you stop? What if you take a breath between acts? Stand center stage and say nothing? No punchline. What if you let the silence echo? No lesson. No breathing? No applause. Just you. That tension? That panic of unfamiliar stillness? Do you feel it? Because the audience only claps. That's the illusion losing its grip. When you give them something they've already approved. It gets silence. It gets confusion. But the real transformation doesn't get applause. It gets resistance. When you rewrite your role, they won't cheer. Because they were never real. They won't follow. They won't follow. When you walk off the set entirely, they were habits with voices. Traumas with stage lights. Doubts dressed in velvet suits. You'll finally hear something deeper. When their clapping fades. And when they disappear, your own breath. Unrehearsed, unscripted, alive. You don't need an audience to be real. You don't need their applause to exist. You don't need to perform a feeling just because it got cheers once. You are not the stage. You are not the character. And there is no one left to impress. The moment when the lights dim, you are the quiet that comes after the performance. Let the audience applaud nothing. Because from that silence, let that be enough. Something true can begin. It's strange, isn't it? A misplaced step. The moment a scene doesn't go as planned. A word that slips the mind. A breath taken too late. That moment, the illusion pauses, when life forgets its lines. And for a flicker of time, because when you forget what comes next, no future pushing you, There's no past pulling you, just presence. Raw, unfiltered, and entirely without a script. You've felt this before. In those seconds where the rhythm breaks, when something unscripted pierces the pattern, you spill your coffee, you say something you didn't mean to say, you forget someone's name, and for a moment, everything feels realer than real, but also wrong, dangerous, unstable. That's because the illusion doesn't know how to respond, and neither do you. When you step out of character, you've memorized your emotional choreography, how to react, when to smile, when to shut down. So do you. It's not just a pause. So when life forgets its lines, it's a glitch. And like all glitches, it shows you the architecture underneath. It reveals the set design, the wires, the backdrop. You see, the fear is realizing that everything else might have been fake. The fear isn't that something went wrong, is actually reciting most of what we call living, reciting beliefs, habits. But what happens? Identities. When the lines are gone, what happens? When someone you love no longer reacts how you expect, or when your job title disappears, or when your memories contradict themselves. The show falters, you're left with silence. And in that faltering, do you know what's hidden in that silence? Not a metaphorical one, a real psychological threshold. A door, between the mask and the mirror, that most turn away. The door between the performed self and the possible self. To make it feel normal again. To get the rhythm back. They scramble to remember the next line, because normal is comforting. Familiar patterns feel like home, even when it's painful, even if they're made of cardboard. And that's the trick. And that's the trick. So you mistake stability for truth. For truth. Repetition for meaning. But in truth, when life forgets its lines, it's offering you a chance to rewrite, a chance to improvise. And that's terrifying. To reimagine. Because without a line to cling to, you have to listen, really listen, to what's actually happening in the moment. Without the armor of habit, without the crutch of expectation. You have to be there. The silence will scream. It's not easy. The audience within will beg for the script to return. Stay in the forgetting. But stay. Stay in that unscripted space. Isn't failure. Because sometimes forgetting, it's freedom. You begin to remember who you could be. When you forget your rehearsed emotions, when you forget who you were supposed to be, and when you forget the story, you begin to see the stage for what it is. You start to feel new ones. An open space. So next time life forgets its lines, waiting to be created anew, don't force the cue. Don't rescue the moment. Let it. Let the silence stretch long enough, because in that pause, to feel where the truth begins, you are no longer acting, not the show. You are witnessing, but yourself. But the moment before the illusion begins again, not the illusion. And if you're quiet enough, brave enough, still enough, that everything you called real, you might just realize, was a line read from someone else's script. And now, you are free. No director, a stage with no script. Imagine this, no props, no audience. Just actors walking into the scene with only one instruction. Make it feel real. That's your life. A kind of cosmic improv. But here's the twist. You think you're following a script. You think there's structure. Because structure feels safe. You believe there's a plot. And the illusion of control is the comfort blanket we drag across the stage. But if you watch closely, the lines change depending on who you're with. There's slippage. The story adjusts itself depending on who's watching. And when you're alone, you go completely off script. Why? Because reality, at its core, isn't fixed. It's not a rigid screenplay. It's improv theatre, where the props are beliefs, the costumes are identities, and the audience is. Every day, you walk into scenes. Grocery stores, office meetings, arguments, daydreams. You scan for your role. And without realizing it, the victim? The expert? Am I the hero here? The child? And then you perform. You improvise based on the rules you've rehearsed. You absorbed them. From your parents. But no one told you those rules. From how people reacted to your earliest scenes. You learned what got applause. From the culture. Smiling in discomfort. Apologizing for needs. Hiding complexity. So you kept doing it. Because repetition brings predictability. And predictability feels like truth. But here's the secret. Just because a scene is familiar doesn't mean it's real. Just because a response is automatic doesn't mean it's authentic. Most people never question this, hoping the next scene will give them meaning. They keep ad-libbing their way through life. But meaning doesn't come from the script. And that realization, it comes from realizing there isn't one, terrifying as it is the first step toward liberation. You get to choose how. Because once you know you're improvising, you can step out of character. You can pause. You can rewrite the scene midline. This is just one version. And whisper to yourself, look around. There's a rule. There's something else too. In true improv theatre, you accept what's given.
Yes.
Yes, and then build on it. Life works the same. And you're handed trauma. Yes. You're handed chaos. Yes. And now you create healing. You're handed silence. Yes. And now you find rhythm. And now you listen for truth. It means staying awake enough to respond. With intention. Improvising doesn't mean making it all up randomly. With curiosity. With presence. But there's danger here too. You'll keep replaying the same tired script. Thinking it's fate. Because if you don't know you're improvising, the character arc, the genre, you'll blame the story. When really, it was just a choice you never realized you were making. And this is why most lives feel trapped. Not because of external constraints. He thought the stage was the world. But because the actor forgot he was acting. He thought the spotlight meant worth. He thought applause meant love. But applause fades. And the stage collapses. Is you. And all that's left. Standing in the quiet. No line to deliver. No audience to please. That's not terrifying. Just the awareness that the next moment can be anything. To stop trying to get the scene right. Because it means you're free to drop the performance. That's sacred. You're in a space of becoming. To stop fearing that you're in the wrong story. You're not in a story. Let the next line come not from memory, but from presence. And that space is improvisational by nature. But because it's true, let the next truth be spoken not for effect. Let the next emotion arrive without explanation. And it doesn't need to be perfect. This is your theatre. It needs to be real, unrehearsed, which is to say, unpolished. So the next time you feel like you've forgotten your role, or lost your place in the scene, alive, smile. Because it means you're finally waking up from the illusion that you ever needed a script in the first place. That invisible veil. That strange moment when something in the air shifted. You don't remember the first time it lifted. Just slightly. And someone backstage bumped the curtain. As if the scene you were in was part of a stage set. You might have called it déjà vu. Or a glitch. Or a feeling that something wasn't quite anchored to this moment. And then, in a blink, the veil fell back down, and the world resumed its choreography. But what if that veil was always there? A soft partition between two performances, the one you're living, and the one rehearsed so many times you forgot it was just rehearsal? We rarely talk about the borderlands of awareness, and what is real, that liminal space where what feels real, which side you're on anymore, each reflecting the other back until you can't tell. Circle one another like mirrors. That curtain isn't made of fabric. And that it's made of assumptions. It's made of the rules you never questioned. The thoughts you think automatically. The identities that were handed to you. Before you knew you could refuse the costume. But another way of seeing. Behind the curtain is not another dimension. It's the same room. But the lighting changes. Same chair. Same breath in your lungs. The background music, if there even was any, goes silent. The mood shifts. And now, You feel yourself sitting inside the performance when this happens, rather than just watching it unfold. You hesitate. You become aware not just of the moment, but of your presence within it. And that awareness alone is enough to make everything shimmer with uncertainty. Who am I when I'm not acting? What part of me keeps bowing to invisible cues? Why do I feel most myself in the moments that seem least rehearsed? Most people live on just one side of that curtain. The truth is, the well-lit side, the socially acceptable side, the version of life where small talk replaces silence, from older, more tired actors, and emotions are performed like roles passed down. But some people begin to sense that the curtain is thin, that if you move quietly enough, maybe you breathe slowly enough, and feel the other side pulsing, you can press your fingers against it. But as if some deeper version of you is waiting, you feel something watching, not in a paranoid way, for you to notice that you're still pretending, still hitting marks on a stage that was built, still rehearsing, and sometimes, just sometimes, before you had a say in the set design, you pull the curtain back. You sit in silence without needing to fill it. You speak not because it's expected, but because something true rose from below the surface. You look at someone you love, and you don't perform love. You become it. And in that moment, you are no longer in a role. You are in reality. Not the shared illusion, not the socially sanctioned hallucination, but the raw, naked now. It never lasts long. The curtain is heavy, the lighter it becomes. And habit is stronger than awareness. But the more you practice noticing, the easier it is to remember that you are not just the actor. You are the audience too. And sometimes, you are the playwright. But never the script. It was a memory passed down, because the script was never real. A survival tool. A shield. A lullaby. But never the truth. The scenes start to feel more alive. And here's the paradox. When you stop clinging to the script, but because you're finally experiencing them, not because they follow your expectations, more real, there is no applause, without filtering them through the lens of performance. Behind that curtain, no validation, no story arc, just you, and will never exist again, in full presence, breathing into a moment that has never existed before, or stop playing roles, like you must deeply from Walland, or abandon responsibility. This is not a call to reject society. That roles are not identity. That performances are not selfhood. It's a call to remember. It's not locked. And that the curtain can be moved. It's not sacred. It's just the echo of old rehearsals. It's not guarded by some great cosmic bouncer. Tired lines, well-worn masks. And the moment you see through it, really see, do I keep pretending this is the only way to be real? You can choose. Or do I step through and meet myself on the other side of illusion? Because that's where the real play begins. And you're not late. You arrived exactly when you were supposed to, and ready for the presence beneath it. When you were tired of the act, the curtain moves. Take a breath. You've rehearsed this moment more times than you realize. Not just in dreams, not just in memories, but in the quiet, invisible loop to keep the illusion in place. Your mind runs every day. The way you smile when you don't mean it. The way your body tightens when someone expects something of you. The way your thoughts preload phrased before you've even stepped into a room. Each is a script. Each is a scene. Each is a rehearsal. And somewhere inside you, beneath the layers of practiced politeness and internal narratives, there's a deep knowing that this whole life might have been a final rehearsal for something real you've never quite touched. Not afterlife, not death, not transcendence in the spiritual sense, but the raw, unrehearsed you, the self that doesn't need an audience, the consciousness that isn't sculpted for applause. The final rehearsal is not about preparing for something later. It's about recognizing that you're already mid-performance, and the curtain is rising now. Now, you've believed in the illusion, because it gave you direction, because it was safe, when the silence felt too vast, because it told you who you were. But what if that safety is what's keeping you asleep? What if the performance was never meant to be perfect? the more polished the illusion becomes. Just seen? Here's the twist. 1. Your reactions become predictable. The more invisible it gets. Your thoughts become automatic, before you're even aware they've arrived. And the audience inside your mind, your emotions rehearse themselves. Are you the actor? The one that claps every time you fit the role, starts to lose track of who they're watching. The director? The script? The scene? You don't need to answer that. Or just a flash of awareness. Slipping through the cracks in the stage, it asks only that you pause, because this final rehearsal doesn't require certainty, that you notice the tape marks on the floor, the way your hands repeat gestures that were never really yours, the lines you've said so many times, they've stopped belonging to you. This moment right now, this is your cue. You're being mirrored, and everything that feels familiar, you're not being watched. Gently, might just be repetition, wearing the mask of truth. So, take it off, without resistance, without panic. Let the illusion fall, not with a crash, because reality isn't something that replaces illusion, but with a whisper. It's not a revelation, it's what's left, when the illusion no longer needs to hold itself up. To breath. It's a return, to body, to presence, of this moment. To the unrehearsed stillness, and no performance remains. This exact one, where no audience is needed. You might not recognize yourself at first, not the self that lives without scripts, not the self that doesn't loop, but keep sitting with it. Let it feel strange, let it feel quiet, is not emptiness, it's space. That quiet, a thought not inherited, a gesture not mimicked, space where something new can arrive, you'll know, a truth not performed. And when it does, not with your mind, but with something older than memory, something that has watched every rehearsal and waited patiently for this final one to end, not so the play could finish, but so life could begin, but because you don't need to pretend anymore, not because it leads to an ending. This is the final rehearsal. You are not what you've memorized. You are not what others expect you to be. You are not the rhythm of repetition. You are what's left. When the last echo fades, when the mask falls, when the lines are forgotten, you are what remains. When you no longer need to feel real by rehearsing it. And that is more than enough. You just are. So now you're here. No more lines, no more scenes. Just the quiet space after the final curtain, where even the echo of your thoughts begins to soften. You've seen it all now. You've seen it all now. The illusions so practiced, they forgot they were lies. The rehearsals that became reflexes. You followed the loops, peeked behind the curtain, watched the mind pull strings, on memories that felt like truth, only because they'd been replayed enough to settle in your bones. You. And still, there is something left. But not the you they clapped for. Said every line, not the you that hit every mark. Smiled on cue. What remains is the version of you that doesn't ask to feel real. The version that doesn't cling to pattern, because it doesn't need to, or chase the rhythm of expectation. The version that sits with the rawness of a thought unformed. Unformed. Lows around saloons, a breath unrehearsed. Unrehearsed. A moment unpolished and entirely yours. The illusion isn't gone. It never needed to be destroyed. It was never the enemy. And habits don't vanish. It was just a habit. They soften. They loosen their grip. When you stop clinging back, you won't stop performing overnight. You won't wake up tomorrow and suddenly know how to live without the mask. But now, you'll notice. And noticing changes everything. You'll feel the shift in the hesitation before a reaction, in the pauses between thoughts, in the strange lightness of realizing you don't have to play along. Not always. Not always. Not anymore. That life demands your performance. And maybe that's the most rehearsed illusion of all, when really, it's just been waiting for your presence. Let the stage go dark, so let the audience fade. Let the applause echo into memory. You were never here to earn reality. You were here to wake up in it. Just breath. No cue. No spotlight. And this moment, that's real enough. And maybe finally,